good news from Geneva. The World Health Organization has made it official. Smallpox throughout the world has been virtually eliminated.
Smallpox is the first and to date the only human disease to be eradicated globally.
On May the 8th, 1980, the World Health Organization announced the complete worldwide elimination of the smallpox virus. This is supposed to be the greatest achievement of vaccination, but was smallpox really eradicated? We saw in the last video how variolation, which was the procedure of inserting scabs, pus and fluids from sick people and animals into the skin, was used in the hopes that it protected the person from disease by causing the body to produce antitoxins or antibodies. Variolation was eventually replaced with vaccination, and doctors began to divide the term smallpox, which was then used for conditions with rashes, into many smaller labels. So when people that had undergone vaccination developed symptoms previously known as smallpox, rather than admit the ineffectiveness of the treatment, they reclassified minute differences as different diseases. The creation of new labels is a method still used today. If you want to show success in eliminating a so-called epidemic, you reclassify diseases. This is easy to do since most diseases have the same symptoms anyway. If you want to scare people with an epidemic to sell the flu shots or COVID vaccines, you just join the different classifications into one. In 2020, the CDC reported of pneumonia and influenza hospitalizations and deaths as COVID deaths. This was known as PIC for pneumonia, influenza and COVID. Also, it says, deaths reported for week 49, 2,113 had COVID listed as an underlying or contributing cause of death on the death certificate, meaning that anyone dying from whatever cause is listed as a COVID death if they had been tested positive for COVID prior to death. And so you get ridiculous things like this. Reported on 12 News, a man who died in a motorcycle crash was counted as a COVID-19 death in Florida. Dr. Pino tells Fox 35 that one could actually argue that it could have been the COVID-19 that caused him to crash. And so, we read in this Daily Mail article of October 2020 that flu cases drop 98% around the world. There's a surprise. In the southern hemisphere, where the flu season happens during our summer months, the WHO data suggests it never took off at all. In Australia, just 14 positive flu cases were recorded in April, compared with 367 during the same month in 2019, a 96% drop. By June, usually the peak of its flu season, there were none. In fact, Australia has not reported a positive case to the WHO since July. In Chile, just 12 cases of flu were detected between April and October. There were nearly 7,000 during the same period in 2019. and in South Africa, surveillance tests picked up just 2 cases at the beginning of the season, which quickly dropped to 0 over the following month. Overall, a 99% drop compared with the previous year. In the UK, our flu season is only just beginning, but since COVID-19 began to spread in March, just 767 cases have been reported to the WHO, compared with nearly 7,000 from March to October last year. Now let's get back to smallpox. The relabelling and reclassification of smallpox was also a lucrative business model, because for each individual label they could create separate drugs, therapies and vaccines. What today we call chickenpox, monkeypox, tannerpox, scarlet fever, measles, rubella, herpes zoster, erythema multiforme, molluscum contagiosum, impetigo, dermatitis, and so on, were all previously unified under the term smallpox. All of these labels are simply different stages of the same detoxification process in which the skin is involved. This relabelling caused a lot of confusion for doctors, because it was very difficult, if not impossible, for them to differentiate between smallpox and its newly created subgroups. The Persian physician Rhazes in the 9th century is credited as the first person to separate measles and smallpox as 2 separate conditions. In his treatise on smallpox, he considers pain in the back to be more peculiar to smallpox, and nausea and anxiety more frequent in measles. The separation of smallpox and chickenpox as 2 separate conditions is credited to English physician William Heberden in 1767. The term chickenpox, or varicella in Latin, has been around a long time. It is derived from the Latin variola, which, as we know, meant smallpox, and was applied to smallpox with a mild course. William Heberden's idea of separating smallpox and chickenpox as 2 separate entities was not accepted by most doctors until over a century later, in the 1900s. The idea behind the separation, according to Heberden, was so that if the public got chickenpox, they would not think they were immune to smallpox and think they do not need the smallpox vaccine. The difference, according to Heberden, was in the appearance of the pustules on day 2 and 3 after the appearance on the skin, and whether the crust on the pustule appeared by day 5. He agreed that the pustules were the same size in both smallpox and chickenpox, and both contained a yellow fluid, but he claimed that chickenpox pustules would not become scars, as in smallpox, but then said that they might become scars if regularly scratched, or if they were severe enough. So in other words, it's different, except when it's the same. Since 1980, no doctor considers smallpox in the differential diagnosis, but in 1923, 2 out of 3 children were diagnosed as cases of smallpox. In 1958, the World Health Organization announced its campaign to eradicate smallpox through mass vaccination, and in that same year a new disease was discovered: monkeypox. In 1970, the monkeypox virus decided to jump to humans, which happened in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where smallpox had been considered eradicated for 2 years thanks to the smallpox vaccination. In a 2012 NIH publication comparing smallpox and monkeypox, we read that cases of monkeypox were likely misdiagnosed as smallpox, and that monkeypox was not recognized as a separate disease until 1970. In other words, it was the same disease until 1970.
For all of these reasons, I have decided that the global monkeypox outbreak represents a public health emergency of international concern.
In their own words, any rash on the skin or in the mouth can be a symptom of monkeypox. They are taking us back to the old definition of smallpox, where any simple pimple on your face or body can be called monkeypox. We have seen that the term smallpox, like leprosy and plague, was used to refer to all diseases. Then the use of the term smallpox was narrowed down to refer to all conditions accompanied by rashes. Then, after the introduction of variolation in Europe, smallpox began to be fragmented into many small labels. After the WHO began the mass vaccination of the world's population against smallpox in 1958, and vaccinated people developed symptoms that would have previously been diagnosed as smallpox, doctors simply diagnosed them as different diseases. That's how smallpox was eradicated, by playing with terminology. In reality, smallpox has never been eradicated. It was just reclassified. After the eradication of smallpox in 1980, all cases that would have been previously diagnosed as smallpox began to be called chickenpox, and many other terms. Thus, the general public were misled about the success of the smallpox vaccination. Epidemics are brought to an end by splitting up one collective term into many different labels, and epidemics are started by combining the separate labels into one collective term. We saw this with the so-called COVID-19 epidemic. It was created by combining all the respiratory symptoms that used to be grouped as separate labels into one collective term, COVID-19. They did the same thing with the eradication of polio. But that will be for another video. Thank you for watching.
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!